All right, welcome to another esports segment here. We are looking at CSGO, and we have a guest with us, Ryan Hodge. He has been pushing esports for the industry, so it's really great to have him on to be able to talk about our first DreamHack slate and just CSGO in general. How's it going?
Hey, what's up, Chris? I am doing well, man. Thank you for having me on today. And yeah, excited. Contests are growing. The $33 bigger. We saw 20K up top today for the $15, and the 222 is growing as well. So it's good, man. Things are well. Bullish on esports. So let's go, baby.
That's right. So I got a couple questions just to ask you from a DFS perspective for people kind of listening about esports and CSGO in general. So when you started playing CSGO, which is one of the ones I know you've been playing quite often, is it a game that you've played personally, or you just got into it from the DFS perspective and just kind of learned using numbers and statistics?
No, Counter-Strike was something that I played competitively for a while. Before it was called Counter-Strike Go, it was just called Counter-Strike, and there was different versions of it. There was 1.5 and 1.6 back when I was in high school, and that's when I played competitively. And then, you get married, you have kids, and video games kind of take a back seat, but still play Counter-Strike Go occasionally a few years back, but I've always followed it. I think it's one of the shooters, unlike Call of Duty or some of the other FPSs out there, that are like a true skill game. I love the economy system in it. I think it's a great spectator sport, if you will, from the esports side of things. It's very easy to follow along. I think the casters are great. So it's just something that I have a little passion for.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a little bit different than my starting point. Has not really played a ton of it, but tried to learn it more from a DFS perspective. And even when I've watched Call of Duty live, like the Call of Duty League compared to CSGO, as you said, from a viewer standpoint, it is so much easier to follow CSGO. It's not as chaotic, and you're not
Yeah.
even knowing what's happening in Call of Duty usually by just looking at the kills on the side and maybe the hard points and the points, but much easier to follow from like a sweating perspective, and that's kind of what I like the best too from a DFS side, is to be able to actually sweat out what you're playing. So
Yeah, I mean,
um,
let's be real. Most of us are here for the sweat, right? So
that's right, exactly. That's exactly right. So when you are building, and I know I'm assuming you do both GPP and cash. I tend to lean more cash heavy. Just I've always been that way. But in your lineup construction, when you're typically having a slate like today over three significant favorites, or even for tomorrow's slate, do you like to stack two from every team, go for the 3-3 stack, hoping for a sweep? How do you kind of delineate where you draw the line and picking only favorites?
yeah, it's tough. In cash, it's a little bit more straightforward because you're not overly concerned about ownership. If a guy's going to be 80%, you're not really looking to fade 80%, right? So I do think it will be a little slate specific on a 3-2-1 or a 2-2-2 or a 3-3. If there's clear cut in regards, or if it's a little more clear cut in how the market share of kills on a team is, I think you can go 3-3, but there are a lot of top heavy teams where like the first guy, we can just like use Zaiwu as an example. He is the market share kill leader in his team, and a lot of times I just run him solo. And so that can lead to a little bit more of a 2-2-1-1 or a 3-2-1 for me. So it really does depend on the slate when building optimally. I think the most optimal builds, though, are the ones where you leverage smaller condensed market shares of kills on favorite teams, or teams where the line is really close. So something where it's like plus 130 or plus 160 is a lot closer in reality than you would expect for when a team in baseball is plus 160, or
Right.
in NFL a team is a plus 160 dog. There's a lot of volatility in Counter-Strike. And so especially when the map vetoes start to come into play, those plus 160s can be severely mispriced, because a lot of the times those Vegas is sharp, but I think there's still inefficiencies in how they're posting these lines.
Yeah, and I think I've read up on that too, where they're not really adjusting the lines based on the map picks. So once those maps get determined, that there definitely can be an edge in those lines for sure. I have kind of taken the same approach, with Zaiwu, usually running him solo, running simple solo a lot of the times, and actually sometimes even targeting two players from the other team just because them as a team seem pretty DFS friendly as an opponent,
Hmm.
because they seem to just sacrifice themselves a lot of the times to set up for
Hmm.
information for some of their top players. So I know that has been one route I have taken, but I do think one piece that I've kind of tried to break down is when you're punting. I know a lot of people like to go to that cheapest punt on a big favorite. And then if they don't get that third map, they're really at a disadvantage just because the discrepancy of that top, the gap widens with that,
Yeah.
the more maps that they have to play. So like a Manic and all these punts that are always on these huge favorites tend to not work out for a lot of people if they don't get that 2-0 sweep.
Yeah, you really do need a 2-0 sweep when you're looking to punt. Is that 20 points is far exceeding that punt's expectation on a map, like far exceeding expectation. So it really is great to get that.
Awesome. The last question I have for you, Ryan, here before we go into the slate is, when you're looking at data for these players, what kind of time frame? I know on HLTV, I kind of try to. My goal usually is to just replace it with the context lineup. That feels the most accurate. I know
Yeah.
that sometimes it's not a big sample size, but I mean, do you go beyond a year? Do you like to look at the short term? What
Yeah. So
what do you?
great, great. Sorry, sorry. Yeah,
No, it's all
great,
good.
great question. I do think recent form is extremely important in Counter Strike. Like the way that a team is currently performing, you should be putting weight into from a baseline and projection standpoint. When you're modeling, using 3 months worth of data is what I use to build out a baseline projection. When I start building for a cash lineup, though, going to HLTV, going to the stats for the individual team, and filtering last month, and then kind of flipping between last 3 month and last month just to see if there's a player who might be in a much better recent form. You can also use on HLTV, they have the under the analytics tab under a specific match, you can go to the analytics center and there's a 3 month column and then there's an event column. And the event will show their recent HLTV rating, which is just kind of like an all encompassing stat. So I actually put a good amount of weight into recent form. It, I guess to give you I don't know if it's necessarily an outlier example, but somebody like Dupree has been playing very well recently over the last like 4 to 6 games. And so I started prioritizing him a little bit more than I would Magisk, especially at the price discount, is really what it's looking at. I'm not saying that like you should be playing Dupree over Magisk, but if you're looking at large field stuff, you get a different leverage from ownership, and then there's obviously a salary gap between the two. That's one random example of looking at recent form, but I do really take recent form into consideration.
No, and I think that's a perfect example because I think a lot of people, especially yesterday on the showdown slate, it was pretty easy. The chalk line seemed that was fading Dupree with using the other top three and Nexa, and that obviously did not end very well for the people
Right.
that fit that in. But yeah, I've kind of tried to use that too, and I also think that you got to be really careful when you're looking at the DK pricing because they are really receptive to like one or two previous games. I know for NIP, Knock was priced lower than Rez by
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit, and I felt like Knock was the better play there, and even Lecro at the $1,600 price discount. But Rez had a 70 and 80 point game too, last two prior to that. So a lot of people went that route. So I think kind of using some of that recent form, but also not over, weighing one outcome or one or two games. So, all right, we are going to get into our slate here. So I'm going to pull up our DraftKings lineup, and we're just going to kind of go game by game here. And then we can talk a little bit about the slate as a whole. I know you and I talked about here a little bit before this. The pricing is pretty soft in terms of we have 3 teams that are coming in at massive favorites. Astralis at -900, G2 -300 to -400, depending on the book, and Team Liquid at around -500. So I do think G2 is definitely the most susceptible here, probably. And even with North finally getting Jumpy out of their lineup, I think that will help. I don't know that the replacement is all that much. I mean, he's definitely better, but I think his price on here is a little egregious. So let's take a look at the first game between Astralis and Heroic. From my perspective, starting off, I think Device is too cheap, and I think he's probably going to be the highest owned player one of the highest owned players on the slate, and for good reason. Sporting almost a 0.8 kill per round here in the last 3 months, and really just kind of destroyed the field at Road to Rio. I think after that, kind of what you just talked about was Dupree and Zipix. Where would you go here next with Astralis?
Yeah, this might be one of those slates when I take a look at first glance, I could easily see myself running 3 from Astralis here at leveraging Device up top and a captain. I mean, it's laughable that there's a $200 difference between him and Naf. And so I think Device is very, very cheap here. He leads his team in a market share of kills, like the kill to death differential over the last month. He has almost 80 more kills than the next leading player, which is Magisk. Magisk, Device, and Dupree are literally all like 3 or 4 kills apart. So for me, I would probably just take the discount and play somebody like Dupree, Zipix, and Device or something along those lines, and do a 3-man stack from Astralis here and end up doing a 3-2-1.
And I think even like, and if I pronounce the name wrong, you probably have a better idea than I do, but is it Glaive?
Yeah, Glaive.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like his price coming up to 7,000 makes him a little bit unplayable with it being relatively close to the other players.
Yeah, you've got to be careful too. There's actually 2 shining examples of this on this slate as far as like opposite ends of the spectrum. You got to be careful when you're rostering in-game leaders. So you have an IGL like Glaive, they tend to take a very big back seat to the rest of their team. And that is obviously portrayed in their projections and their salary. If you look at the kill to death differential, so it's dangerous rostering those IGLs. Now the opposite end of that spectrum is in the next game, so I'll wait to talk about that player. But yeah, for me, like I wouldn't go anywhere near Glaive. Honestly, even if he was like 6,500 or 6,300, even with the 2-0 sweep potential, I'm not sure. Like you're getting rid of a lot of upside by rostering a guy like that.
And do you can you touch a little bit more on the IGL? I guess
Yeah,
my perspective of it is I know it's like the brains behind the operation, and they're
definitely great way to describe it. So they are making all of your calls. So post round, during that buy round, they're talking about a strat that they want to run. He is most of the time saying, hey, Device, drop Magisk. Hey, Magisk, drop Device, the op, right? And so they'll swap money in the economy system. He calls a strategy. He'll then call the mid-round strategy, depending on what they want to do. So during casting or during the games, you'll hear the caster say, hey, this is their default. This is a mid to B split. This is them crunching on A or a B pop. Those are a specific strategy within the game in that specific round. He is calling all of that and orchestrating all of that. It's kind of like trying to do your taxes while driving. It's like very, very hard to do, right? You're just having to focus so much brain power on 2 separate things. So, but there are some really good IGLs who have really good fragging potential too, and those are a rarity. If you ever want to know who the IGL is, you can go to Liquipedia and you can see the little king logo next to their name, and it'll show you who the IGL is. Kind of bummed HLTV doesn't just do it by default. You have to go to a separate site to check it out.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. That's great information just for the esports industry to kind of start learning a little bit more about the game and the roles that these players have, because And I'm assuming you know too, or know pretty well that the roles probably change when they go from team to team. I don't know, like a lower competition player moving up to to a different team may change their role.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when Kerrigan left FaZe a while back, he left the IGL responsibilities over to Nico, and you kind of saw Nico struggle through it a little bit. And we all know Nico is just like a massive fragger, very, very good at this game. But when he has to start IGLing, he took a little bit of a hit, right? So it's straining on a player for sure, and they definitely suffer from a fantasy performance in that way most of the time.
Before we move on to the next game, is there anybody you're even like blinking an eye at on Heroic here, or you just completely pass?
Well, so Bovada has Astralis as a minus 1400 favorite for me right now. I don't like, I just think that's out of control. TSS came from Copenhagen Flames, where he was their top fragger. He is a very, very skilled individual, very good fragger. If this was like, if they were playing North or Contact, I would be all over TSS. But like against Astralis, they're just, I was explaining this to a high stakes player who knows nothing about Counter-Strike and is just trying to get some action down. Astralis are like the New England Patriots. They do not make mistakes. They are methodical. The way that they game plan, like they are so competent on every map. So even if the other team has a higher potential of fraggers, right? So like they go up against a team like FaZe, they're still going to destroy them strategically and put them their backs against the wall the whole time. I have no interest in somebody like Heroic. And Heroic is coming off of swapping out two separate players. So they're one of the guys that Astralis just signed, S-Tag, is from Heroic. He is giving up his contract. His contract is done next month, and he is officially on Astralis' roster. So I wouldn't even be surprised if they're already exchanging information around what Heroic tends to do strategically and stuff like that. Like, this should be the cleanest 2-0 sweep that we've seen in a very, very long time. And now that I've said that, we're probably going to get a close 3-game series.
That is CS:GO so far. Sometimes you think it's the most obvious sweep in the world, and it isn't. All right, moving down to our next game, which I think we both expect this to be the closest, if there will be a game that probably is close at all. G2, like I said, I'm seeing them kind of anywhere from minus 300 all the way up to minus 400, taking on North. With out Jumpy in the lineup, their coach who had to jump in during Road to Rio. I think I pronounced his name as Christau. And I tried to kind of look up. He's the replacement here at 8,000. He didn't seem like he had really great underlying stats from the previous team he was on. That seemed like at even a lower competition level. So I'm not really sure how his price got there, unless it was just based off of a couple of recent performances. But let's start with G2. Nexa finally getting a little bit more respect, I think, here. I still think they're all too cheap regardless, but Nexa was, I think, priced the third most expensive out of him, Hunter, and Kenny S in the last 3 or 4 games. Now he is the most expensive. So let's take me into G2 here a little bit.
Yeah, so G2, they are a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde. They're definitely a team that will tilt internally, right? So their communications can start to break down. This is very anecdotal. This is not an extremely data-driven approach, but I do think it's worth talking about with them when this game is the closest of the 3. I do think that G2 have like no issues handling this series, as indicated by the implied odds here. Nexa is one of those rare in-game leaders who is such a good fragger. He is the opposite end of that spectrum, where he is IGLing, but I mean, his headshot percentage is fantastic. He is a very, very good fragger. So he's definitely a guy who I'm not concerned about rostering from an IGL standpoint. Like, Kenny S and Hunter are so cheap. I mean, this is absurd. Hunter's been a little bit cold recently. Like, if you look at his last 3 months, he was right below Kenny S in regards to kill differential at plus 121 versus Kenny S's plus 158. If you look at the last 60 days, he's now third on the team at a plus 26 kill differential, and Nexa has actually superseded everyone. So like Nexa's recent form is fantastic. Still though, this is another team who I think you could run 3 on if you wanted to do 3-2-1. This is a team who I'll probably be playing 2 from. And I think I go Kenny S and Nexa here, or Kenny S and Hunter, just depending on salary and how that overall build looks. But this is a team who I definitely want 2 of. The other side of it, like, look, you said it, they're gone through coaching changes. They've gone through some roster changes in regards to their substitutions. Cristal is priced up because of who his competition has been. When you're playing at that lower level, it's a lot easier to have a higher kill per round and a lower death per round. Now that he's coming up to this T1 level and he's having to play against G2, do not expect that at all. That is the salary is very egregious there. He's drastically overpriced.
I think, I think the only person I would even blink an eye at would be potentially AZ, as he's, in games that when they beat G2 recently, I think they beat them in 3 maps. I know it went 3 maps. I thought maybe North lost in 3 maps, but they pushed it to 3. I don't remember, but I think AZ carried the load. That would have been right near the end of the pool play, I think, before the tournament. But I do think like MSL was getting priced pretty high. I think that was kind of just the team was taking on more kills with Jumpy in there, just kind of taking on more of that role, taking up more of those roles. But I'll have to take a look back. I don't know if you're pulling it up right now when those 2 teams played last. I thought
I can definitely check. I was looking at the at MSL's recent history, but I have the head-to-head history right here. They played 5-10, and it did go all 3 maps, and North won 2-1.
Yeah, and if I remember right, AZ just carried the load. I want to say he had a 70 or 80 point game, and actually I can probably pull it up right here. Yeah, G2 he had 79 points, 74 kills, 66 deaths. But again, I don't know that you can put some weight into that, but like you said, I think with them with the roster changes, and I still prefer G2 here at a pretty depressed price tag with the implied odds.
Yeah, definitely. And even if this is a close series, like these offers, so one thing that you really want to look into is rostering these snipers, or people who are pretty much ride and die with the AWP. They have the opportunity for first kill at a much higher rate than a lot of other people most of the time, especially aggressive offers like Kenny S, who we kind of talked about this before we hopped on, but taking an aggressive stance on a map like Overpass, where they'll go peek Fountain, or getting pop flashed in to get into an angle that they can then hold. So I think MSL at $6,400, if you are trying to leverage from ownership, MSL and AZ are the 2 that you definitely are looking at.
Awesome. Yeah, that's kind of where I was at too. What about Amanek? Would you consider him or 6,200 not even really cheap enough to punt there with, if that they don't sweep? Obviously, it's probably a poor play, but is he considerable as a punt here?
I don't think the slate necessarily dictates that you need to do that. Normally, I would be looking at a guy like Amanek or even Jax, right? But at this soft pricing on this slate, it's not something that you necessarily need to do, especially if you go something with like a value captain like Kenny S up in the captain at what does that make him, like 11,000 or something along those lines? 11.2. I don't know. I can't see the math there.
Let's see. I'll bring it up here.
11.1.
11.1.
So like that is such an insane value captain. And then you can get Elige, Device, you can go Hunter, Magisk, and then at that point you could look to punt down if you wanted to, or you just move away from somebody like Magisk and take a little bit more of a value. So like, I just don't know if you need to do that on this slate.
Yeah, and I think that's where I have been too. When we get the 9-10K guys that we really want to get in there, then I do feel like you can potentially look for that punt that might sweep. But in this case, I don't think that we need to go there quite yet. All right, let's go to our last game with Team Liquid and Chaotic. I think Elige is by far here our number one play. And then after that, I think Team Liquid is obviously in a great spot, but I think we can go quite a few different ways.
Yeah, so similar to G2, some of these North American rosters, man, can be real wishy-washy. And that's where, I guess to be clear, G2 is not a North American team, but in the sense that they can be up or down. We've seen Team Liquid have some awful performances when they've been in similar spots, when they've been, massive favorites like this. I still think, like, for me, my ownership will be heavily condensed around Astralis. And if you want to leverage some ownership, I think running threes from Team Liquid, while they will be owned, I think they are far less owned than G2 and then Astralis, especially from a pricing standpoint. So this is where I think you can leverage ownership, but still be in a good spot. You're not being cute. You're not playing North, right? But you're still getting some of these guys at suppressed ownership who still have the potential to have, plus 10 or plus 15 days in regards to kill differential.
Right. And I think, like Twist and even Stewie 2K, in a positive game environment could definitely pay off those price tags, like you said, and really leveraging ownership. Like, I don't really see Elige being very popular in the captain role based on his price. So that could be another way to, if you can get a ceiling game from him. I think NAF is like we had talked about a little bit before. If you don't have Astralis on this slate that's underpriced, maybe you consider NAF there, but where he's priced around device, I think in cash, it makes a lot more sense to just pay $200 more for device.
Yeah, and when you look at those top price guys like Elige, NAF, device, I think NAF is easily the lowest owned. But I think it's warranted. Like, he shouldn't come close to sniffing an Elige or a device game. Now, look, you can play the volatility. You can embrace that 10% outcome or that 15% outcome and go for it. But it's not something like NAF is not a guy who I'll own in a 3-max team and a 5-max team in the 2-2-2. And NAF will only make it into builds in a multi-entry for me, just based off of, bumping my randomness up and putting him in based off the top of his projected range of outcomes.
Awesome. And Nitro at 5,600, he's barely over a half a kill per round. Again, would absolutely need a 2-0 sweep to make value there. Is he someone you would consider?
No, some earlier builds, I put him in as like a dummy lineup just because he was there at 5,600 and it just made it easy for me to reserve, knowing that if I slept through lock or something like that, I wouldn't be dead in the water. So but no, you want to talk about recent performance. I mean, this guy is the bottom fragger on his team, owns essentially nothing in regards to market share of team kills. And you really want to be focusing on Elige and Twist here. Stewie probably is more owned than Twist just because they're very, very similar. And if you take a look at like a projection model, they'll be projected so similarly, but the price gap between them will probably have people leaning towards Stewie so they can play Magisk instead of Zipix or whatever the case is, right?
I remember reading, it was at NAF that has, or they were talking about it on the when they were hosting one of his games, that he's got like thousands of dollars worth of skins, like 100K worth of skins for CSGO. So I thought that was pretty incredible.
Don't even get me started on the skin game, dude. The virtual dollars or the real dollars that you spend on fake stickers and fake skins in Counter-Strike is unbelievable.
So, and this is from a non-CS:GO player, but so is
Yeah.
that's what's showing up then competitively on their weapons then, whatever
Yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah. So
purchasing?
when you see a guy with like a yellow AK or a orange and white AWP, that is a skinned op or a skinned AK. It's not what just comes in the game default. They paid 50, $60 for that Ozimov AWP, right? The one that is orange and white, the one that you always see Kenny S using. It's not like an overly expensive skin, but then there's skins that are 10 grand, like a knife skin or something like that. Like it's out of control.
Oh,
No
that's pretty
different than
amazing.
Fortnite skins, man. I don't know how old your kiddos are, but if they're playing Fortnite, they're probably asking dad for V-Bucks so they can buy some skins in the game, dude. Like it's crazy.
It's just like you get into that other like professional perspective of these guys. Like, what are they spending their money on? They're spending it on virtual skins for what's to show up. Not a
Virtual
nice
skins
car
and
or a big house.
Grubhub subscriptions, dude. That's where they spend their money.
Yeah, so that was pretty just entertaining to hear from somebody that feels like they're learning about the game and the lifestyle of some of these players. So that's going to kind of recap the tomorrow's slate. I think we will have 3-game slates, I think, every day.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of how it's
That's what it
set
looks
up.
like.
I don't know if they're going to try to insert any of these other games. I don't think they haven't really done it in the past. They've only really relied on those in the lower level, when there hasn't been the tier 1 going on, or just only
Right.
a showdown slate. So
yeah, for the foreseeable future, as far as I remember looking, for at least the next 20 or some odd days, we should have 3-game slates. And I think depending on the slate, like that is how you should lean towards your optimal lineup construction. I think you should get stuck in a box of just running 3-3 because that's what somebody told you to do. I really think you should pay attention to those condensed market shares and build around those. On these 3-game slates for small field, like single entry stuff, 3 max and cash, really avoid the opposing player. You should really just be looking at one opposing player in like large field stuff. But I tend to avoid opposing player, even if I think the game's going to be tight. In the long run, I don't think that's a plus EV thing. I could be proven wrong, but I don't think so.
So sorry, I missed that first part, but you said like if you're taking an opponent on somebody you're playing, kind of like taking a goalie against a player you're playing against in hockey. Yeah.
Yeah.
That negative correlation you try to stay away from.
Correct. Yeah. Even if you go back and you look at some slates, like you've exported some stuff to Excel or using a tool like Lineup Study, you might occasionally see people shipping something with that, but those that's the outlier situation. I just don't think it's plus EV in the long run.
So in that case where it's a close, odds are close, you would be willing to take like a one-off from the underdog if you feel like he's got enough of the market share of kills for his team?
In large field.
Yeah.
In a situation where you're willing to embrace more variance because you're competing with 7,000 other people. In your head-to-heads, I don't think it's a plus EV. Like a hypothetical situation, let's say G2 and North, they were minus 150 and plus 110. I still in cash, I wouldn't be looking to run Kenny S and Hunter with AZ. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just, it's few and far in between where that actually, like you're just limiting your ceilings on your players, and you still want to get upside in these 3-mans and head-to-heads and 50-50s. Like you should still be building for upside.
Yeah, and that makes that's a good point, because I do think a lot of people will tend to go a 3-2-1, and sometimes that 2-1 even being from the same game, just because the odds are close. And obviously, really, them getting paid off is A, getting to 3 maps, and or B, getting some overtimes, which
it's overtime situations. Yes.
And that's the unpredictable part of any DFS sport. That extra time that just adds on, more potential fantasy value. So, well, I really appreciate you coming on today. Hopefully we can get maybe hooked up again next week and just kind of continue to grow CSGO as a DFS sport. Any other final thoughts before we sign out here?
No, man. I think just make sure that you're paying attention to each slate individually. Don't get stuck in a box around specific builds. Each slate is unique. So.
All right. Well, we will stop here, and we appreciate everybody for listening and hope you can check us out again. Thanks.